or firewood is being used, right? So you can't do that, right? Considering the present regulations that we have, right? So it's very difficult. Rather, मतलब जैसे हम लोग passive house के guidelines है, which can be bylaws. Similarly, if we can strategize and maybe enforce even ECBC or for that matter ENS through the bylaws, so then we have a ambit of actually enforcing it for say 3 star and above जितने भी hotels आपके आ रहे हैं, it will be mandatory for all these. मतलब आपके जो codes and standards है, it will become mandatory for all of them. सिमिलरली मतलब यू कैन आइडेंटिफाई कि आपको कौन कौन से बिल्डिंग टाइप्स है विच कैन फॉल एंड विच शुड बी लाइक जो जिसके लिए कोड मैंडेटरी होना चाहिए एज फेज वन एंड सिमिलरली यू कैन maybe gradually start maybe when it.
Do you know that state paragraph on cooling in Ladakh?
So you should remove it, no? You
HVAC.
should, maybe you should remove it. But that can easily be removed.
It needs to.
Open the windows.
But HVAC is also about heating, right?
So it was on cooling.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. You can remove the cooling wala part and then just
Cooling wala part to.
But as an advisor to BEE, I must mention that one of the problems that BEE is facing in various states is that it can only give a recommendatory ECBC code.
Yeah.
It has to be adopted as bylaw by each state individually. But now I see a point where UT Ladakh can probably accept it and adopt it as a specialized BE, ECBC code for Ladakh.
No, but you see, Sanjay, as you rightly said, that the ECBC is it's morally, it's merely a model directive.
It's a model.
It's a recommendatory code. And thereafter, considering that the implementation has to be, take place at the state or the local bodies, they are required to kind of amend it and adopt it.
Correct.
And notify it based on their requirements. So Ladakh, I mean, the various points that have been made by colleagues here in this room, they are free to go about making those suggestions to the high-level committee and make sure that they are embedded in the actual regulations that really get notified. If that is not the case, then again they will be burdened with all kinds of things that are not going to be implemented.
Such as
and that is
3
where
paragraphs of cooling.
and it's just going to follow the rest of the earth.
And no coverage of thermal. So actually more than cooling, no coverage of thermal heating.
And that is where it has happened. See, there are about, I think, 18 or 20 states which have notified ECBC in the country, and none of them are at a good implementation.
Because they are all the tick box.
Basically, the politicians ask the builders कि ये करना है implement, and the builder says नहीं करना. So they say कि भाड़ में जाए, ये डस्टबिन में जाएगा.
You're being recorded.
I don't mind.
And telecast worldwide.
So regarding this 20 kilowatt requirement which is in ECBC code, is one of the things which we need to understand is that it is at the design stage which we are evaluating it.
Exactly.
So when ECBC addresses it, it takes in consideration the heating or cooling requirement. So while you are doing evaluation through simulations and other methods, and in fact designers or MEP consultants are designing all these loads in the design, and also so at the moment those 30 kilowatt requirement would entail all these things inside that thing, because it's at the design stage. You cannot say that how much oil is going to be used for heating later on, but that this aspect is included.
But is it specifically mentioned in the code? That this should be, that this is how you should model.
Yeah, I think what is
And you should
required.
actually have thermal loads as well as this combined together, then evaluate. Then you are right.
So I think this is the unique problem of Ladakh. So here, this clarification should be added there, that the heating loads which are being used in the building should also be reflected in the demand of the building which is being.
And how to reflect that?
And,
That also should be mentioned.
and there is one more thing, it's an energy performance code. It does not define the technology, the material, nothing, how you achieve it. It's the energy standard. Go about achieving it any.
Yes, you have the money.
Which you can specify in the code,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I mean, you can choose
It's
your own path.
technological, technology independent, whatever you want to do.
Okay.
Yes. So
This
Mr.
discussion
Nikhil
has
Sawant
been
is-
going on since 2007. That table still remains. This will go on.
So that
Presented.
policy, because carbon neutral is difficult to happen in Ladakh because most of the things comes from the everything is importing because cars is plastics, steel, everything we are importing. So carbon neutrality is still difficult, but we can use energy neutrality term for Ladakh right now. Thanks.
I want to add something into
Yeah.
that. Energy neutrality should not be like, okay, you generate 25 gigawatts through solar and keep continuing burning all the fossil fuels in the buildings. So that balance needs to be seen. That should not be greenwashing of neutrality, maybe. Like,
I mean, definitely, that's what I'm saying. It should be defined clearly in the policy that we are going through energy neutrality.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I would just add
Yeah.
to that.
Thank you.
Did a perfect line.
So some of you are not part of the esteemed tables, and but if you have something to add to this thing, then
You want to say something?
Yeah, there he started.
Yes. Good morning to all. My name is Tanzin Rapias. I'm working as Executive Officer in Municipality Leh. First of all, I would like to thank Hayal for inviting and having me here. So my idea of carbon neutral Ladakh. So I have few points which I believe it's an important and effective. So first is the integration of renewable. We, for heating purpose, we use hard cokes and fossil fuel and firewood. So if we incorporate some provisions of passive solar building in building codes, so that would help us during winters. And second is utilizing solar energy to set up, an electric charging station, which will help to promote and develop sustainable mobility system by replacing the usage of fossil fuels. Uh, as we know that the fossil fuels are going to over in coming years. And third is promoting and inculcating the habit of using of or carrying own bottle or cups by avoiding the use of plastic bottles or single-use plastic. And since it's a digital world now, and we have observed for official communication, lot of papers are being used in offices and homes. So I think we need not get print out of papers in office unless it is necessary, so as to save a tree. And lastly, we should adopt an approach 3R of waste management, which is reduce, reuse, and recycle. Thank you.
Hello, July everybody. I'm one of the builders here. My recommendation would be like not building just only passive solar heated building, but let's go for like energy efficient, so that you don't. Otherwise, you might be of saying there's no space of the front building in tall building orientation. You don't get exactly the as per your solar requirement. So I would say we should focus on energy efficient building as well as solar where possible, because existing, let's say, lay town is so crowded. You cannot. I don't think you can go for all passive solar heated buildings. And that way, actually, even if you use fossil fuel, you may be using lesser. If you have your room already warm because of the insulated and thermally sound, then I don't think you would need to add just because you have budget for the building, for fuel budget. So I would go for that also. And of course, where possible, solar passive heated building should be there, and the building code should also specially mention. Then people have no excuse of not following the building code. That's what I would.
Yeah, that gives me that reminds me that Sweden, for example, is a nation where they have such extreme codes that they don't have any heating in buildings. They heat it with the body heat of people, occupants who enter it. They're super and in a sense they are passive because they are zero energy. There is no source of heating other than the people themselves. So it's like designed like a quilt, I guess.
One point, just last point I wanted to make was, uh, is there also talks about having mandatory energy audits in hotels, let's say, with capacity of more than 50 beds, to have a baseline during the peak tourism season, during the season when there is no tourism, during the time, generic time like these, so that we could have a baseline throughout a year or 2 years, and then see which building consumes what amount of energy, total energy, and then lay off those mandatory guidelines for existing buildings. Because as per for the new buildings, we already mentioned there are modeling, the different models that could be used to come to these energy consumption numbers.
That can be done only once the state government designates buildings as designated consumers.
Designated consumers.
So that is an exercise which follows that. But
Okay.
first, the notification process has to take place. Otherwise, nobody will take it seriously. And it's very important. The point that you make is very important. So that you also have a database, and you are also able to kind of measure as you operate those buildings, and the measurement and what gets measured gets managed. That's the mantra. So you need to make sure, but that will happen. That process will happen, and probably my
We have
colleagues.
started with that only. I think the larger hotel buildings right now are under the ambit. I think gradually when you have more number of hotel buildings, when
So
we
that
start
notification will
Maybe,
happen.
maybe depending on the number of beds or capacity of a hotel,
I think
that
it's
could
more
just
on the
go.
connected load
No,
of
it's the
consumption.
connected load.
Again, connected load doesn't reflect the entire energy
I get
consumption.
you.
So that's the point I was making. Even when we were conducting audits through a startup, we were working with hospitals, hotels. We looked at what is the number of people or the beds or the capacity that this building can hold, and depending on that, you could come up to a number that could reflect the actual energy consumption of that building.
I mean, we could continue to discuss, but maybe offline.
Sure, sure.
Yes, thank you for.
Thank you.
Yes, so thank you very much for a very, very interactive, enriching, and full of ideas session. I'm sure most of the recommendations will find their way to the codes and other bylaws that will eventually shape the way we think about energy and building in Ladakh. And thank you very much. And now I would request Kastanzin Chospel, Honorable Executive Councillor, Ladakh Autonomous Hill Development Council, to address us.
सबको जुले First of all, I would like to thank Khayal led by Kasuna Mangchuk and Gitanjali ma'am for organizing this first carbon neutral conference here, and I welcome you all from around all over India. And I'm very happy that we are having a discussion on carbon neutrality, which is vision of our Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji of carbon neutral Ladakh. So what I would like to mention three or four. First I would like to start with a personal story as to with respect to how the functioning is as of now. As my colleague Nuguji, who is also my colleague in council, was also mentioning that most of the time the engineers here don't follow. But what I would like to mention is that building codes here don't have the basic solar codes that are essentials to build buildings. For example, one of the pass out of Sigmol, which is from my village only, who is building passive solar houses all over Ladakh. Gurmeet ji and we had a talk, and it's a personal story as to coming up with the passive solar, what you call all weather toilet and cafe in Himis, which we built. And we started first with the designing as to how do we go about it, and he had inculcated all the aspect of passive solar houses in his design, and we had made a all DPR out of it, detailed project report for the government, and we had submitted. And but sadly, the most of it the project cost was around 25 lakhs. So once we released the funds, then we saw that technically it was very difficult to execute because so many aspects of passive solar housings are not integrated into the bylaws of the PWD and Rural Development Department. So we have to make many changes as to finally we could execute for the cost of 25 lakhs a cafe and a what you call toilet of passive solar in Himis, but it was very costly also. The cost itself came to around 27 lakhs, and we have to make many changes. What I'm trying to convey here is that the very first instance is we need to change the building by codes as with respect to passive solar, and I'm very much in favor of what Kasonam has like being revolutionizing in Ladakh and all over India and the world, that passive solar is the way ahead for Ladakh especially, and in the coming times the challenges that we face of climate and the environment. I think for Ladakh passive solar is the way ahead. But from the council side, we are also initiating, and we had wrote a letter also that building no course the ramped up buildings and what straw mud bricks needs to be inculcated, and those are in the it's a government procedure. It will take time, but I would like to assure that we also have put up this on 3 or 4 platforms as to changing the codes. Second is with respect to what Nomal has rightly said, that Ladakh need not see what's outside all over the world, but we need to go back to our roots as to what our roots are and what we were doing like 20 to 30 years back. So, for example, in my like worksheet that you gave, which is the iCard here, where we have to draw. I had drawn 3 or 4 aspects out of it, which I would like to just like ponder upon and convey you. The problem that we are facing as of now, Lord, for example, the after being granted UT, the amount of construction that you'll see, I think this is the first time in around 20 years that you'll see construction all over Ladakh, especially with respect to bricks, cements. And the problem is with respect to what I see is that the most of the buildings or the shops that are being built as of now, the all the contractors they hire what you call the people from outside. Also the local economy is not very, I would say, not very strong as to command cater to their demands. For example, amount of their labor that goes into making it. Second is the amount of bricks and the iron rods that are required. Third is the amount of what you call money that my colleague Nubule rightly said, that amount of money being pumped into it. But what I see is like we had also discussed in the council and one of the meetings that we had, which was chaired by Honorable Lieutenant Governor and attended by all the executive councillor and the council itself and all the secretaries, we had suggested that uh, we need to like inculcate basic solar buildings and toilets and other things in Ladakh in general. So what we I suggest as of now is that we need to look, especially when most of the models that Rohit just right now said there are four buildings here. But I think that amount of awareness which my normally also said, the amount of awareness is not there in the public as of now, how this can be integrated and it can be economical for them also. So what I think is, as one of my villagers gourmetly is also working on the same field, I think that more youths and more entrepreneurs needs to be uh, given this technique. And as Gitanjali ma'am rightly said, that it's not a copyright, it's a copy free, where the technology itself is what to call, it's available all anyone who wants to adopt it. So I think that more people needs to be, more youths needs to be connected here. More our council as a whole will also would like to put forward this point, that if we can have a seminar or a conference, some other places also we can work together in that way, where we'll we will try to have entrepreneurs who are working in this area to come up. And I think the demands needs to be created ourselves only. Like, how do we create the demand needs to be created by ourselves, then only the economy will pick up. The third aspect that I would like to say, that uh, especially focusing on the local economy, because I think that passive solar as a concept is very good, but yeah, the concept itself should also integrate the economic aspects of lifting up the popular local locals also. So I think where we can have one aspect is with respect to workshops that we can have. Second is workshops, especially with related to masons. For example, 20 to 30 years back, the whole Ladakh, all over Ladakh, each village used to have 5 to 6 masons or 6 pond, we call, and it was very self-sustaining. So we were having a, because I also hold the art and culture department also, we were also having a discussion as to how do we re-engage them, how do we like give them a better economy. I think passive solar itself is a can be a new direction where we can chalk a new way ahead for our local economy as a whole. And lastly, I would like to say that uh, collaboration is very important, and I would like to thank this is a start, when it's a great start, and I think in the coming times more of collaboration can be done, and it can be projected. And last that I would like to say is, like, where our council is working upon. For example, uh, where are we working upon, in which areas we are working upon. First is with respect to we have also, like last time we had a talk meeting with respect to integrating e-buses, e-cars here. For example, it's very expensive also for a common layman person. It's very expensive for himself to like operate everything. So we starting with the council this year. We are getting e-cars and e-buses, and we'll have charging ports all over wherever required. This is the first step. Second is with respect to, like, we are also heading towards integrating this into PWD and rural development department building laws. And third is that I look after his culture department also. So last time we had come out with a conservation and preservation of heritage sites, and now the next step we are heading forward is with respect to culture and heritage policy of Ladakh. Under the cultural and heritage policy of Ladakh, one of the main aspects is with respect to giving more attention to buildings of Ladakh, where I would like to mention, we'll integrate the passive solar houses also, and we are also, as you see that passive solar, as Kaswanam and Ma'am Gitanjali and all team that they have worked upon, has integrated most of the Ladakhi designs here. So we are also going forward with it, and cultural and heritage policy, I think, will be a new step ahead, where a more rigorous discussion will be held upon. And one of the main aspects that we will be also touching upon is buildings here, especially passive solar. And without much further ado, I would like to lastly thank all the participants who have come from all over India, and I hope this 2 days sessions generates new ideas and gives a new vision to Ladakh and to all over the world. And lastly, I would like to thank the higher team as all led by Kasonam and Gitanjali ma'am for organizing first carbon neutrality conference here. And I, from the concert side, I would like to wish everyone best wishes in future in the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kale. And when we have counselors like Norbu here, and please, and Stanzanji. We know that we are in the future is in the right hands because they are walking the talk. Just as he is building, he was instrumental in that cafe in his village. So is he. You were building a passive solar school for children in Fiang. So they are the leaders who are walking the talk and showing the others through their actions, and we know that we are on the right track when we are. So I'm going to do a small quiz to really know if you're listening to what I'm saying. So what are the three pillars so far you have discussed of Hayal? Before I introduce the fourth one. Huh? No. So the first pillar I said of Hayal in the morning. Either I'm a bad teacher or you're a bad student. So I said the first pillar is contextual education, right? Then we said we are picking up this shelter as one of the contextual problems we are solving. Second?
Experiential.
Exactly. So 10 out of 10 there. So second is we don't just teach it in the classrooms, we do it. With the village, with the government, with the students. It is learning by doing and learning by being and immersing. So experiential education. The third was
Collaboration, partnerships.
yes. So again 10 on 10 there. So collaboration, which is with the stakeholders, with all the disciplines, And the fourth, before I invite Sanjay Prakash to come and tell us about the evolution of PSH, the fourth pillar of Hayal is, which was beautifully brought up in the last session, is reclaiming indigenous wisdom. So India unfortunately had a history of colonization, because of which we lost our self-confidence and started looking westwards for all our answers. Whereas India, we should be proud, is the only unbroken civilization for the last 10,000 years. Today, it's the only unbroken civilization. So we must have done something right that we still survive. Okay, so we should develop that self-confidence, not looking westward, though we can incorporate the best practices from across the world, but looking inward as well and looking into our heritage and rich culture and incorporating that indigenous wisdom with modern technology, to come up with our own solutions, which is the fourth pillar of Hayal. And I invite now Sanjay Prakash ji, who is one of Hayal's founding partners. The master plan that you see there has been designed by Future Institute, of which Sanjay Prakash ji is a prominent member. He's an architect with a commitment to
three places.
yes. So he's an architect who has a commitment to energy conscious buildings, and all his life he's been working with buildings which are low energy, and hybrid air conditioning, autonomous energy and water systems, bamboo and earth construction, community based design of common property, and so on. So, and he has been one of the earliest architects who worked in Ladakh to build the Ladakh building, a passive solar building. I invite you to take us through the evolution of PSH in Ladakh.
Just a second to add something, sir. We had to merge the snack break because we were running a little late. So that was supposed to be the end of the inaugural session, and now the second session starts.
Has already begun.
Yeah. So do you need the?
No, I don't need anything.
Oh, okay.
And I don't need any PowerPoint or anything. But I do need the
Whiteboard.
The whiteboard.
Yeah.
I would break. Mic. No, I need the marker. Thanks.
देखा चेयर पे लगा दो ना वो ऊपर रह गया सबको दिखे एक चेयर ले जाओ
Sonam in his keynote talk has already given a huge amount of history of this whole business that we are involved in. And in that sense, I have very little to add to that. But I'm going to give you a historical perspective. My own working life began in 1980 as a lab assistant in IIT Delhi, and I was a lab assistant for a year. Then I became a research associate. Then I became a scientific officer, whatever it's called, and then we had various books written by Department of Energy in USA, basically from Washington DC, and they had something which they coined as passive solar heating. Large parts of the Western world, of course, are based on heating, and it didn't interest us so much because our focus was in places like Jodhpur or where cooling was the main requirement. But anyway, I still remember that I read the original work in which they identified three sources of heating, all from the sun. So the source was the sun. The moderating technology was one of three things. It was direct gain, indirect gain, and isolated gain. Now, what do these three terms mean? Essentially, direct gain was when windows, typically from the south, get in some amount of heat, and because of the greenhouse effect, you get a warming inside the space because glass is opaque to infrared radiation, and as soon as the radiation comes in, it gets converted to infrared, and then it can't get out again. This is the same reason why a car heats up in the sun. Indirect gain was invented, in the modern sense, invented by an engineer called Felix Strom in France, when he basically put glass on top of a masonry wall. So the idea was, well, in his original scheme, he had two vents, one at the bottom, one at the top, and he had dampers to control the amount of air that could flow. So the idea was that the sun would still heat this. It was a blackened surface, and this was so sized, and the material was such that it would not radiate inside during the day because you needed heating in the night. So essentially, he used to, I mean, I don't remember exactly how, but he used to coordinate the flow of air such that in the day when the sun was beating down, the air would flow upwards and get into the room and come out this way, and somewhat reversed in the night. And this we know today as a mass wall or a trombe wall, named after Mr. Felix Strom himself. When mass wall, which is what Matin Tak has done in Ladakh for the first time, you get a situation where you ignore these vents. Now, what do you lose when you ignore these vents? You lose convection, but then you have to size the thickness of the wall and the material of the wall such that you start getting a radiant surface in the night. Our human skin is 4 times more sensitive to radiation than it is to convection. So that is the reason why we feel hot even at minus 15 in a Ladakhi winter day when we are standing in the sun. Because we are much more attuned to that one ball of whatever 5,000 degrees or whatever it is. I don't even know, which is just half a steradian angle subtended to your skin, and you don't care about the minus 15 which is going around you, minus 20 or whatever. So when you lose convection, you don't lose too much, is what Martin Tak found, and he used it first in the Lambton school um in this is in Shankar, north of Ladakh, north of Leh, sorry, and then he continued using similar techniques and developing them from scratch. I met Martin when he was at the end of his career, and it was a great meeting because he taught me so much in 10 minutes that I couldn't have learnt in half a lifetime. So he was really an original thinker. I don't know whether is he still around, Sona? Anjali, do you know? He must have retired anyway, but he was really a good thinker. And what's more, he spoke the language of the people. He spoke Ladakhi. So I have even seen in Choglamsar Sabu village, where I went, Sabu village, a Danish engineer arguing with a um, Sabu farmer, because the Sabu farmer was making this kind of a wall. This was 1986 when I first visited, and he wanted a view of Stoke Kangri. So he got it through this part of the window. And the engineer was trying to tell him that you got it all wrong. This is not supposed to be 1.2 meters high or so. So he said, don't worry. We'll manage somehow, happily. And they did, because this was a kitchen window anyway. So it didn't matter too much, because there was an old Moravian stove, I remember, inside this, which would radiate a lot of heat as it cooked. So it didn't matter. And it remained warm enough through the night. Anyway, this room was not used in the night. So he had sufficient confidence because he said, I have talked to Martin Tak. And he said, that's it, that's the final word. There is no further extra expertise that I need. And I don't need your knowledge, which comes from Denmark. Anyway, you can't speak either English or Hindi. So I can't understand you. Or Ladakhi. So I can't understand you. So, but they were speaking a sign language, reasonably okay. So this was an interesting aside. But when Ladakh was opened, I think it was 1973? 74, okay. I've got the dates all mixed up, I'm sorry. But roughly the chronological order is right. So you please correct me when I name some wrong dates. So in 74, Kostis Stambolis was a Greek architect who saw the opportunity to get an EU grant to create the first modern passive solar buildings in Ladakh. Now, glass was a new material because glass had not existed in Ladakh before. So glass itself was a magic material. It had this odd property that it would heat one side and not allow the heat to escape, and so on. So, Costis, he wanted some help in India. So he wrote to Terry. Terry at that time had a field research unit in Pondicherry headed by Chamanlal Gupta. So this was redirected to Chamanlalji, and Chamanlalji was very interested. He is a physicist. He works with the Sri Aurobindo Ashram, and he happens to be one of my mentors. But anyway, he was very interested, and he said, "हाँ करेंगे." And so he said, in his own practical fashion, that you need one example of a direct gain, one indirect gain, and one isolated gain to demonstrate. So they did one shell khang, as it came to be known, a glass room. Then one greenhouse. No, this is, sorry, I got the wrong kind of marker. Okay, anyway, now this will be a job trying to clean this up. So one greenhouse. This was in Shambhala Hotel. That's what they identified, which is on Fort Road. Pinto is the owner, right? So he was quite okay. He said, "आप एक कमरा बना दो extra greenhouse, which I will use during the day." And Karakoram Hotel was the Shelkhang, and I frankly don't remember what the Trombol where it was tried out first. But whatever it was, there were three projects.
Semola, maybe.
Semola, you're right. So they took three hotels: Karakoram, Semola, and Shambhala. And they did this. This was in the late 70s. And it was monitored by Chamanlalji, who who in any case was an expert at monitoring these things, and he did an hourly simulation and he plotted some curves which basically gave these kind of results. If Ladakh has this kind of a daily variation of temperatures, where this might even be -5 or something in the winter, then the direct gain you this kind of temperatures, not much lag, but a lot of decrement as it is called. So if you wanted a day use room, then it was good to use direct solar gain. So Shelkhang is ideal for day use rooms. Then, somewhat predictably, indirect gain gave you even more decrement, but more importantly, it pushed this window, this peak, by a few hours. And isolated gain gave you almost a flat curve and it pushed this by as much as you wanted, almost 12 hours if you like. So it was actually the rooms behind the greenhouse were actually the warmest during the coldest part of the night. But the variation wasn't that much, as you can see from these graphs. So obviously the variation was say ±2 degrees. If the variation outside was ±10, and the variation in the direct gain was ±5, I'm making these numbers up, and the variation in the Trom wall might be say ±3. So this laid the foundation for the passive solar science, which was then used to make the Trom walls, 24 of them, in Choglamsar's SOS village in the mid 80s. Choglamsar SOS village had 24 hostels, as some of you might have seen, and all of them, each one of them, have a Trom wall behind which the children sleep. So you can see that they were obviously reasonably comfortable, and these were passive buildings, even though he had a hypocaust built in. So by this time, I think Costis was no longer designing. It was some other architect from Delhi who was working with SOS villages. So they had built in a hypocaust just in case they wanted to light a fire and heat the whole building up. But it was never used. I asked this specifically when I visited. So obviously these worked well. And I may also point out that I visited for the first time in 1986, and I visited on an army project because the army had two problems. One was that they could not feed chicken to the non-vegetarian Jawans. Why? Because they could not hatch an egg in Ladakh. They had never hatched an egg in Ladakh till 1986 February when I visited. Professor Dr. Chima was there, who was the brigadier at that time in the what's it called? The Forest Research Institute? No, Field Research Laboratory. FRL, Field Research Laboratory. And
he was quite smart in the sense that he's figured that if I go underground, I can probably get the kind of temperatures which will allow a hen to sit on the eggs and hatch them. And what he needed me to do was to calculate the amount of light because he said it should not become dark. Hmm. So I still remember my first trip to Ladakh was in an army plane which had two generals in the front or two officers in the front, two of us, one physicist colleague of mine from IIT Delhi and myself, and behind us was a plywood wall. And when I opened the door out of curiosity, the plywood door, I found 5,000 chiclets, you know, just sitting in the plane and eating dana. It was quite a surreal experience, but anyway, I lived through that, and then 2 months later, we got the news that we hatched the first egg. And so now, I think these kind of brooder houses, eggs and chickens are fed to the Jawans uh, all over Ladakh. The second problem they had was more intractable. That was that in Aksai Chin, they had various tents and they were burning 30 liters of kerosene per day per Jawan to keep them warm, to keep them alive. And they wanted to simply reduce that. They said, अच्छा कुछ कम कर दो. So हमने कहा हम zero कर देंगे. Aksai Chin is even sunnier than Ladakh itself is. So we went up in a helicopter from Choglamsar, I remember. And I almost lost my hand because it was February, March, and it was -10 or something. And out of playfulness, I took off my glove and I was about to slap the uh, helicopter body when this officer caught my hand and said, Nani, don't! You'll have to operate you to get your hand back, maybe. Because at this point it was -10 or whatever it was, and the steel body of the helicopter would be even colder, and my hand would just freeze in place. Anyway, so we went there, we saw the conditions, we heard the gunshots and all that. That was also happening. And we came back and we designed what we thought was a reasonably good design for a solar tent, which had some transparent surfaces in polythene, which would reduce the need for heating. But when tendered, it came to 3 times the cost of the regular tent that they were using. So I can't say anything except to say that the army's tendering methods were uh, quite crazy, and they had obviously been captured by a set of vested interests. But anyway, so that was that. So that became nothing, but we did attempt. Meantime, I also went next year to Spiti on a similar project, which, though not in Ladakh, is somewhat similar kind of area. It's a cold desert, and it's approached from Shimla. So when we went to Spiti, we saw yet different kinds of technologies. Much more rammed earth is used there. It's called Matkanda, and they were manually ramming it with hammers. And they used a very interesting technique for making houses, which was that they don't design doors and windows in advance. They first make 4 walls and raise it up to 10 feet or whatever it is, 8 feet, 9 feet. And then they take away the molds and then they decide to cut the doors and windows. So it was quite an amazing way of working. But anyway, I learned a lot from the masons, and I've always learned a lot from masons in all kinds of places because I've just been interested in learning. So later on, many years later, when I was working with Sonam Dava, I told him about this technique, and he said, "Hey, this is very interesting. Please get me some masons from Spiti who can actually do this for us." And I tried, but at that time they were simply not available. So it didn't work out. But anyway, Ladakh then approached me
I had, of course, studied the whole gamut of solar architecture in Ladakh, and in fact wrote my first book called Solar Architecture in Earth Construction in Northwest Himalayas, which was a collaborative effort with 5 physicists and me. And the 5 physicists didn't want me there because it figured in the CV as a book written, which gives them a lot of points. I didn't care, so I said, "Okay." But naturally, it came out that since I had written the text, it came out as that. I think the physicists' contribution was substantial in that because they had done manual simulation of the various designs that we made, 6 in Spiti and 6 in Ladakh in the earlier trip, 86. So they had manually converted the Fourier transforms, and they had all kinds of notations by which they had written out the whole appendix in the book, which is nothing but just equations with all kinds of sub not titles, but what are they called? Superscripts and subscripts. Footnote. And not for footnotes, but you know, T A I representing temperature of ambient inside or something like that, and so on. So it's written like this, which frankly I couldn't understand, but I still had to proof it. So I learned Fourier analysis during that time because I had to proof it. So I had to learn it. So this was my maximum physics education in my 2 year stint at IIT, which by the way had ended in 82, but I was called back to be a member of this team in 86 when we first came to Ladakh because I think they saw me as a valuable member of the team, shall we say. Okay, so so then after that, there are places that Sonam has mentioned in his talk. Leho, for example, was a big player in doing earth construction and south-facing buildings and trombos. But greenhouses never really caught on. So I would say greenhouses have been much less used, and tromb wall is the main outcome of all these ideas that seem to be implemented at a very large scale.
I think you're talking about Ladakh. Ladakh?
Okay, thank you for reminding me. Sonam Dawa came into my life, and he wanted us to design the Ladakh campus in Chanspa. So we did 3 buildings there, and there were lots of learnings, and I'll share them with you. So, for example, the first building we did was a hostel for what was it, some 48 children or something like that. And for the first time, I used really small rooms. Then this was a toilet, but then there were 3 or 4 rooms after that, and there were bunk beds, 3 and 3, so 6 kids to a room, which was really quite a squeeze. I probably won't do that today, but anyway, I did that then. And these rooms were only 8 feet, 8 by 8 feet, or something like that. But there was a very strong tromb wall here, and that kept this. Chamanlalji later on did an analysis of this and measured the temperatures inside. So I remember once minus 15 outside, it was +8 inside. So I would say it's in Sonam's definition, class 1, first generation or first 1.5 generation building because it's a little better than 4 degrees or 5 degrees. But importantly, the kids didn't freeze, and that was a big thing. Because they said, "My God, you actually have a building which doesn't have any heating. That's impossible to imagine." But there are 2 or 3 things. First of all, we tried a toilet here, which was a traditional Ladakhi style toilet, approached from a bridge. That kind of worked. Though the problem with Ladakhi toilets is that in April they really stink like mad, because then the frozen mass just thaws and it starts decomposing. So, Mr. Dawa made me see a design from Vietnam, a Clivus type design, and he said, "ये try करते हैं." So I said, "Okay, nothing to lose. Young architect, not much of a reputation to guard." So this was the design. So we did an inclined plate to a certain angle, a little bit less than this, in ferro cement, and covered it with glass. And there was a chamber here to take the decomposed feces. And we made the mistake of making it part of the building. So we had an attached toilet with a dry toilet that led to this chamber. And to start it off, you needed some straw. You needed carbon rich organic material. So Mr. Dawa put some straw here and we started it off, but it had to be decommissioned. I still remember its rough plan. There was a room here, a room here. This was a toilet. This was the decomposing material whole thing. This was the guest house. So we discovered that this stank the place down so badly that it had to be closed off. And they made another toilet here, which they use the traditional Ladakhi style. So this was quite a learning. I even remember I wrote to the London School of Hygiene wanting help in trying to get this whole set of temperatures. They wanted temperatures which I had readily available, so I sent. Somewhere there was a break in correspondence, so I don't know if I didn't respond or they didn't respond. But whatever it is, nothing happened. And this remains an unsolved problem till today. And let me tell you, I would personally give my Nobel Prize to somebody who could solve this problem. Because just now, when I went even to urinate, I still did get a reasonably high degree of smell. So this really has to be sorted out. And something that would work for a 3-star or a 5-star hotel, as well as for IL, would be the kind of solution that needs to be. So this I see as a very major.
So it's not Nobel Prize, Sanjay Prakash Prize.
Okay. Prakash Prize. I don't know what money I can afford to do given it, but whatever it is, you'll get my eternal time gratitude. Because some 5 years later, when we were working more actively for LAHDC and for PWD, they asked us to design public toilets. And at that time, we had to refuse because I knew that they won't work. And they wanted dry toilets near the, not bus stand, the car parking, the taxi area. So they wanted some toilets there. So they've done some water-based toilets, I think. Yeah, that was their backup. So उन्होंने किया. Meantime, I've seen some unusual things happening in Ladakh. One is that the climate is so extreme and it's so sunny that there is no reason why one should not be able to use a combination of direct, indirect, and isolated gain to keep buildings warm all the time. And in fact, Rohit's work is now showing that this can be done. And 15 degrees is an acceptable temperature for me, at least when wearing this kind of jacket, which I don't wear at home. I really did take it out last night from the trunk. Or last to last night, whenever I came in. But But 15 days, this is the other thing. I think you have a session on redefining comfort standards for Ladakh, right? Hmm. So you've done some stuff there. However, it needs to be done more in the spirit of Fergus Nichols, the Scottish researcher who did this on a very firm scientific footing. See, your thing is just a survey, asking people what they feel comfortable in. But I assume that you didn't have the capacity to actually put them in those temperatures.
We logged the temperature they were in.
Correct. And you correlated them
live, what
Fair
they
enough.
experienced and then responded.
Hmm. So you correlated their temperature with the measured temperature with their perception.
Yeah.
Fair enough. That's the second best way. The best way is what Nichols did was he created a copper human being and he measured it in a 3 by 3 by 3 chamber in which you could control temperature, humidity, and thermal. And then he had to measure the amount of heat flow that's going across the skin. And then from there he estimated. But then he also did black body experiments, meaning he did in Pakistan and lately in India also. He did this experiment of black box experiment, meaning he put a suitcase, a black suitcase, measuring 4 parameters: um, temperature, humidity, radiation, wind speed. ये 4 environmental parameters हो गए. And then he asked people to rank their degree of comfort 6 times in a day, every 4 hours or something, and also mention activity and clothing level. So they have to mention, so all 6 parameters came in: activity, clothing level, perceived degree of comfort, and the 4 environmental parameters. And then he correlated them in a huge database because he had some 13,000 data points. By the way, this work has been done recently by SEPT, by Dr. Rajan Rival, who has recently just finished doing exactly this kind of work for Indians. And his results are in the open domain. If you want, you can write to me.
So in fact, in Ladakh also we have done a similar kind of thing with whatever limitation we had for the project. So in the next session, whenever we happen to do that.
Okay, it's already time for the next session because I think I have spoken enough. 15 minutes is more than enough.
Thank you, Sanjay Prakash. The evolution of PSH anecdotally, experientially shared with lots of stories actually was very interesting. And going ahead in the same spirit of collaboration, an important aspect of collaboration is learning. Learning from your neighbors and others who've done similar things. We know very well that Go Keng Swee, who is considered to be the founding member or father of Singapore, learned from Meiji reformers of Japan because Japan was the first developed country. Similarly, this Deng Xiaoping, the Chinese premier in 1978, he visited Singapore and learned from there and thought to make it a model for their country. And we see today where China has come. So very close to, and Sanjay Prakashji mentioned Laos Spiti and Himachal Pradesh. So in Himachal, similar experiment in mainstreaming passive solar buildings has been conducted by Professor Dr. S.S. Chandelji, who is considered by the Stanford University amongst the top 2 researchers in energy. And he has been doing the similar work of mainstreaming it, this passive solar buildings in Himachal Pradesh. And we have him here, though he wanted, we would have loved to, and he would have joined us online, but he met with an unfortunate experience, so we could make it here. So we have him here online to share with us his experience in Himachal. Of course, what he did right, but sir, more importantly, what went wrong, so that we can learn from it, that how we can use your learnings to mainstream this in Ladakh. Over to Professor Chandra, who is currently serving as the founding director of School of Energy at the Shulini University.
So, Dr. Chandel, this is Sanjay Prakash, and I'm in the audience. Hi. How are you? हाँ बोलिए.
Yes, sir.
His audio can be better.
Yeah, just sir, 1 minute. We'll try to improve the audio.
So maybe on his side.
Yeah, so can you say something, sir? Hello? So your internet is not very good.
Your screen is visible, but audio is poor.
You can turn off the video for bandwidth.
You can't turn off the video. He's got presentation.
His video from our side. Please look at the Bluetooth clear.
Okay, let him turn off his face video. Let's try.
सर एक बार अपना वीडियो बंद कर दीजिए. एक सेकंड.
It's not really understanding. It's scratching. On our side.
Speakers. Sir, can you? Yeah, we can hear you.
Is it clear now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Can we start?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
So before you start, let me just say we have 15 minutes before lunch.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll try to finish this.
For his lifetime of experience.
So, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll talking about my experience in promoting the solar passive housing in Himachal Pradesh. That is the technology which is suitable for hilly regions, mountains, as well as in Ladakh also. So, I'll just cover fast because you already have done that. The solar passive technology enhanced thermal comfort, energy efficiency in mountain houses, and we found it a solar house action plan, and I'll be sharing experience of that plant in Himachal Pradesh. Energy issues, we know that there are extreme winter conditions which affect the living conditions, and we have to find out energy efficient house design. And solar energy is quite available in these Himalayan region, very high industry also. So it should be utilized. Maybe if you see this map, India has a vast energy potential
and which is still unexploited. Solar radiation varies from 4 to 6 kilowatt hour per meter square on the average in most of the regions. And similarly, in the these cold desert regions of say Himachal Pradesh, also Lahore, Spiti, as well as in Ladakh area, quite high intensity is available. So it needs to be utilized. Building sector, lot of energy is consumed, everybody knows. So, but the buildings which are designed in hilly regions or mountain regions are mostly designed as per the designs of which are more suitable for plain areas, and so they result in thermal comfort. Okay. So solar passive technology is quite a technology which is very simple and it is introduced at a design level also. And so how we did it, that I would like to mention. Advantages, everybody knows, it can cost from 0 to 10% if done at a design level, and 90% reduction in lighting consumption, overall consumption also. And so mainly these four aspects are there. We can utilize this solar passive technology: heating, cooling, ventilation, and lighting. If these are adopted at design level, it can be very effective. And the design parameters depend upon the sun path, altitude of the sun also. And these are the basically typical diagram how the heat can be captured and how it could be distributed. So basically, solar passive technology is based upon this simple thing. One of the important component, which is the drum wall type of system, which is very simple. There is a glass, sunlight falls. There is a dark colored wall also, which absorb the heat, and it could be the heat, warm air is heat circulated inside, and after some time it can be of two types. One could be summer, if you want to avoid summer heating also, then there could be ventilations also. So we found that this from wall system is quite good for nighttime heating also, because it absorbs the heat during daytime and releases the heat slowly during entire nighttime. So for living rooms, etc., living or bedroom type of this is very quite effective we found. And I'd like to mention that similarly this sun spacing also that we converted into in where greenhouse plants can be grown also. And natural daylight also is one of the aspects of solar passive technology, and which has a simple storage system, double type of batteries. So these are also quite. And nowadays, the solar photovoltaics is also rooftop, so we can integrate with some of the solar passive concept, and it can meet the power requirements of the buildings also. And ventilation is also, we have found that it is also one of the important aspects of solar passive, natural ventilation. And these are some of the concepts which are solar chimney, earth tunnel system, which have been used for the ventilation of high-rise buildings also. So yes, now we'll start how we got this idea. We, as a scientist or this thing, we were interacting in a lot of solar passive workshops, conferences with architects, engineers, scientists also. And based upon this, I formulated an action plan for Himachal Pradesh. I was in science and technology, State Council of Science and Technology, and formulated an action plan for Himachal Pradesh, which was approved by government in May '94. And Himachal state to implement this technology. And then what was this? How to implement this on a in different states. The first thing is the government must take a policy decision to make. So the first taken decision were taken by Himachal government on May 12, 1994, that all government and semi-government sector buildings were designed and is to be constructed and designed by incorporating these features. At that time, there was no solar passive building. So the local architects, engineers of the local housing agencies said how this technology could be, because it requires a lot of cost increase, installations, etc. So at that time there was no building in Himachal Pradesh. So we said, let's take a policy decision done, and they have to do that. Then we identify and then policy decisions were taken at a chief minister level, in which housing minister, science and technology minister, secretaries were engineering chief, architects, they were also present. And we put up a technical project management cell in science and technology council with architects, engineers group, and also we identified 25 buildings which could act as a demonstration buildings with solar passive, because that will only convince the people also. And these buildings were office building, bank office building, MLA hostel, judges houses, ministers houses, hospitals, school building, teacher hostel, etc. Now, the second step was to how to design these buildings at that time, because this technology was not at that time mature enough or promoted on a large scale. Single buildings were designed. So we identify expert consultants, architects, scientists who were working on these technologies also. I think Mr. Sanjay Prakash, who is with us, he was also shifted at that time. Professor Ashok Lal, Professor Arvind Krishan, and many more, around 10 to 12 people. And we told them that since we have to work like a group, so very high fees, etc., will not be available. Then we identified those buildings that which were ready, for which the funds were available, and they were ready for the construction, etc. So we formulated a group of solar experts, and local architects also were there, engineers were also there, and shared the design. And we had a number of meetings in which the designs could be evolved. Sometimes there could be difference of opinion whether we should adopt this technology or not. But our strategy was that we should integrate only minimum type of solar passive features, which could be, so that the cost is not escalated much. Because these buildings are ready and designs has to be modified also. So MNRE provided us some small consultant fees and cost of extra expenditure for this. Meanwhile, we also started specialized training from architects, engineers, because they were not convinced about whether this technology can work or not. And also we have identified some houses also, which could be retrofitted in rural area, high altitude regions of, say, Chamba, Lahore Spiti, etc. And along with, it was very important because houses are generally constructed by the rural artisan, local artisan, which are based in villages, and masons, carpenters. So their training is also important. So we wrote a project with the Australian aid and UNSW experts were also there, and we organized that training. The DST also funded this rural artisan training. So this was quite a good experience because the basic those artisans must be oriented towards this also. And so as I told you, in '94 we took some kind of other policy decision. '94, this was the first decision under which we took the 25 buildings, designed them, and with solar passive features, whatever best was provided within the limitations of constraints of the budget, etc. And in based upon their successful demonstration, the buildings were demonstrated and visited by the people, and they were convinced. Even our local architects, engineers, they were convinced. Okay, this works. The reason was that one day we took entire group to a building, a Muja building, and which temperature, outside temperature was around -5 degrees at Shimla. And then when they entered, the building was quite warm, and so seeing is believing also. So they were convinced, and then they went on designing this. Then in year 2000, another decision after the successful demonstration, and these all the boards, etc., they should involve. Another decision was taken about 2000 meters. We focused on the high altitude. Then in June 2009, so a lot of buildings were taken by PWD, HPWD, Housing Board, etc., and other agencies. And we thought that it should come in the building bylaws also. So that so some decisions were taken. We provided them the design guidelines based on our experience to these agencies. And so in this, the commercial buildings were also taken that they should be designed as per solar passive features. And the town and country planning (TCP), which is known as is the agency which implements building bylaws. They took the decision that no map can be passed without inclusion of solar passive feature. So some guidelines are provided so that this may not be hindrance to the actual house construction. And but in the absence of some driving force also and some kind of laxity is there. But again, we are discussing with them that follow this. So this was the design strategy, that the design should be building orientation, and even if these things are taken up, these are quite no roof material, wall material, whatever is possible, whatever minimum can be done, so that thermal comfort is increased. So this can be. And another thing, after the buildings are constructed, they need to be monitored also for energy performance. So around 200 buildings were constructed during this period, 1998 to 2009, and new buildings are also being now designed by this, and many more can be designed. However, monitoring of these buildings needs to be followed by housing agency and other centers. So this was the one of the buildings, first building which was constructed in 1998. This is HP State Cooperative Bank on the Mall Road, Shimla. Anybody can see that also. This building was already designed to be constructed. Now the solar passive features were added to this building, double glazed windows. There's some chrome wall type of system here, because this was a bank building and there was very little scope for solar radiation, because it was already, location was fixed. So we have to see. And so the bank authorities told us that it may not be working because in winter what will happen. So they put up a electrical backup system also. So we added a solar rooftop solar air heating system with that electrical backup. So the cost of the electrical backup system was also reduced. And the building was monitored also. This was very quite a comfortable building and still working. And this was designed by Professor Ashok Lal, an architect also. And this was the rooftop solar collector here. It has some active system because it depends upon the requirement from building to every design has to be changed as per this thing. So this was the after the building was constructed. Expert team came from DST also or from outside also, and they visited this building, and it was a quite another building which was State Bank of Building Patiala, which is known as State Bank of India now, also was adjoining this building. So this has a rooftop as well as electrical backup, sun spaces and natural daylighting are the main features. So this was the building, Hemurja office building. This was the energy agency's building, and this building was designed by Professor Arvind Krishan, late Arvind Krishan. He was, and this building was already, it has to be retrofitted with sun spaces. It has syntax, double glazed windows, and quite effective sun spaces. Daylighting from roof was also there. Glass tiles were used, and south-facing thermocycling air heating panels were designed. At that time, these were not available, but they were fabricated locally by our group, and it was just 2 meters square. But they were installed outside the rooms, and they were quite effective that within 10 to 15 minutes the room would get warmed up. So this building, I was mentioning earlier also, that this building, when the people from DST team and local architects entered this building, it was very quite a comfortable building. So in our view, the simple thermocycling solar air heating panels are quite suitable for the office type of buildings. And this is the building with Mr. Sanjay Prakash designed the MLA hostel. Why we chosen the MLA hostel? Because we thought that technology can succeed only if the politicians also believe, okay, this is a very simple technology, can be adopted. So it has some simple solar food warmer linked to the wall so that the food could be warm, because and some